Are you a parent wondering if you're doing right by your kids?
A therapist seeking real-world applications for working with children and their families?
A teacher trying to navigate educating the whole child in today's world?
Then this is the podcast for you.
Hey guys, it's Brigid
And Jenna,
the teacher.
and the therapist.
We're back.
We are back. Episode 12.
Yeah, sing it, girl.
Hit that high note.
Love it, love it.
I feel like I'm going to have to start getting really good at, saying it in different ways. Memorizing the episodes just isn't going to cut it anymore.
I'm still impressed that you do that because I still don't know what episode it is.
I try,
All right, what are we talking about?
Today, we're kind of going to continue this was a little bit of an impromptu theme. I don't know if people have noticed, but we've been kind of doing things.
I'm eating a grape in Jenna's face. Sorry, everybody.
Doing things relevant to school, back to school. So we did the 504 plan and that type of stuff. But today we're going to do counseling in the school setting because it can be great because it can make it really accessible for kids and families. Obviously, they're already there at school, hopefully. And I did my internship actually at a program that was specifically it was a early Head Start and after school program. So the kids were already there. Parents didn't have to worry about getting them to one more appointment or anything like that. So it can be pretty convenient.
That's cool.
Yeah.
This is really something that I have no experience with, obviously, because I'm not a counselor.
Yeah.
And so I only have experience with my classroom. So this is kind of going to be, I think, your area of expertise here. But
yeah.
Okay, so I have questions, though. I came with questions that I hope you can answer.
I hope so.
So the first question I have is just how does a counselor get to be in the school to begin with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple of different ways. I just referenced my internship. That was already set up. So my supervisor was a psychologist and she had been doing this for decades and been serving in this community for decades. It was a pretty underserved community. And so it was kind of just the counseling was one more service that they had. They had the after school program and the Head Start and early Head Start programs. And this was just kind of another
a form of outreach
basically
that they were doing.
Yeah. Okay. And so I did that when I was in Chicago. And then once I moved back here, I worked at a community mental health agency. There's actually a lot around here, or a handful in this county and the next county that have that is somebody's full-time job or multiple people's full-time jobs is to go into the school, and they are school-based counselors.
Okay.
My agency did not do that, but we actually had a school district reach out to us and ask, can we have a counselor come to our school a couple times a week, maybe a female and a male. So I went once a week, and one of my male colleagues went once a week to the local elementary school. And I actually really, really enjoyed it doing that. I did it for I don't know, maybe half a school year because they had or most of the school year since they had reached out to me. But usually it's a community mental health agency that the school district contracts with.
Right.
Because then that's just the clinical counselor is paid a salary by the agency. I'm not really sure how the logistics between the school works.
Right.
If the district gets a grant or how that would work, or if it's kind of part of not philanthropic. What's the word I'm looking for? It's part of counselors' ethical codes to do sliding scale or to do things. So I don't know if that would be part of that for the agency that they'd kind of tax write-off. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm not in the finance part of it.
But when you did that, it wasn't there was a tragedy at this school and then they reached out, right? It was Correct. just general.
Yeah, just
for general purposes.
Just general things. So yeah, I mean, I had a set caseload. So at both when I was at the elementary school locally and then in my internship, the school counselor, the teachers or parents could refer students and it might be that they were seeing behaviors in the classroom or at school, problems on the playground, that type of thing. Or it could have been that they knew that they already had risk factors. So like I said, especially the agency I worked at for my internship, because it was a well-established program. And so they had like a checklist that the teachers were all aware of, like, this is a service we offer, so you can refer your students. And here's like a checklist. And so they would check it off, like, if they kind of going back to our ACEs,
right?
Like they had a parent incarcerated, or a death of a loved one, or whatever was going on, and like just many, many different things. And so sometimes it was almost like more preventative.
Yeah.
They were like, hey, their parent just got deported. We're not seeing anything in the classroom, but obviously if we can do it before that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And same thing with the school. So they just had reached out just to like get the services for some of their students. Sometimes it's just school counselors are great. And actually, I don't know, maybe this is a question for you. When I was growing up, we always referred to them as guidance counselors.
Right.
And there's been a kind of a shift that now they are school counselors, and they have a different like education than I do.
Yeah.
For example, they typically, from my understanding, if they're employed by the school and they're at the school, they have like an education degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at one point you had to teach before you could be a counselor. That is no longer the thing, at least not in Ohio.
Gotcha.
But it used to be that way. And so it was an education tract. And like counselors can get a master's in education of counseling.
Right.
So it could be an MED, but it's just, I have like an MA. So there's just different ones, but it's just like a different focus.
I think it gets tricky because the guidance counselors, like I know the guidance counselors that were at my school and into my high school, like were not actual licensed clinical counselors.
Correct.
They were just like
and they aren't.
School people doing mental health things.
Right.
And there's a big difference. And I think it's important to know, like, your child's school might have a counselor, but that's not necessarily an LPCC counselor.
To my knowledge, it is not. It never has been. But what I think is the difference between now saying guidance counselor to school counselor is that I believe that there is now more mental health training in those school counseling tracks.
Right.
If that makes sense. So you could be a licensed school counselor. You would be an LSC, licensed school counselor. Okay. Or I believe, like I was saying before, it used to be much more like you're an educator, and then so you have to teach for so many years, and then you can get a master's and be in like counseling, be the school counselor. And so some people kind of got like grandfathered in on that.
Gotcha.
It's like, no, you don't need to go get an LSC now. But
I know when I was doing my education classes, there was a gal who was in our like intro to teaching. And she said from day one, she's like, oh, I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a school counselor.
Okay.
Which I think she went on to be a school psychologist or something. I don't know. Okay. I know she does testing and stuff now. But I'm not exactly sure what track she went to study, but I know she had to do like mental health and like education things.
Yeah. So. Which I think is more what they're leaning towards, which is great.
Yeah.
And it's like the elementary school, for example, the counselor gave me some referrals. Some came from teachers or parents, but because she had 15 minutes, like a week with kids. And so one, for example, was experiencing like grief related to a parent, and 15 minutes a week just wasn't going to like do her justice. And the counselor could recognize that. And it's through no fault of her own. It's time, and often it's one counselor for the school or for 3 schools, or for the district, for the district. So they're there once a week or whatever. And so to have like extra people that can come in and kind of take some of that off could be helpful.
So I think it's important to note for this conversation, we're talking about counselors coming into the
clinical
LPCC counselors,
or who are social workers,
who are mental health professionals that are happening to be in the school.
Correct. School-based.
It sounds very helpful. It sounds great for accessibility. I feel like there's a lot of pros. Are there cons? What are the pros and cons that we see with school counseling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, accessibility is a huge one. Obviously, the kids are already there. Parents don't have to get them to one more appointment. It's great because like now I work with a lot of kids outpatient, and it's like, do you want to pull them out of school? And then you're pulling them out of school, and then there's like the commute to and from. Yeah. But I only have so many like after school hours. And if I see a lot of kids, like obviously no parent, and nor do I want that, nor is that advantageous sometimes for the children. So kids are already like comfortable there. So yes, I'm a new person coming in, but it's not like a new location. It's not like, because oftentimes I'll have parents come in and I'm like, I love asking this question to the kids. I'll be like, so have you ever been to counseling before? They're like, no. And I'm like, okay, so like, what did your parents tell you about coming here today? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, nothing. They just like hog-tied you into the car and got you here. And the parents, of course, are always like, we explained it. You know, like we're going to talk about our feelings. But without fail, they're like, nothing.
They're like, nothing. I don't even know who you are. What am I doing here?
Yeah. And so, yes, I like, obviously when I was in school, I explained things to them, but it was like they're familiar with the building.
Yeah,
right?
They were already comfortable there.
Yeah. Also, school-based counseling is usually free of charge, so that's a huge
big pro.
Therapy can be expensive.
Yeah.
Like there's no way around that. Whether or not you have insurance, sometimes insurances don't. We're getting closer. Yeah. The stigma's lessening, but it's not there yet. So sometimes you're paying more for mental health than like physical health. Or we're considered specialists or whatever, or it's like a whole other thing. Sometimes they don't accept insurance, so it just depends.
Yeah.
Another pro is I can kind of see things in action. So if there is bullying happening, or I'm having a difficulty with a classmate on the playground, like I was able to witness that.
Right.
Or, hey, you know, he's being disruptive in class. Like I would sometimes go to the classrooms. And so number one, I could observe it. And then number two, I could be right there and say, hey, teacher, let's try this.
Yeah.
Hey,
give an option.
When this is happening, like I'm curious, you know, because I do collaborate with teachers and things. And then I'll be like, oh, well, like we talked about this in session. Do you you could try it in the classroom? But I was like right there. So I could test it out and see if it was going to work in the classroom setting.
Right. Without going back and forth with that teacher.
Right. Absolutely. And then just like, it's easy for me and the teacher, right? Standing right there rather than like calling or emailing and trying to coordinate schedules. So that's another huge pro.
Yeah. And from the teacher's perspective too, because I've sent children from my class or like recommended that they see a counselor. And so then, you know, if I'm given permission to speak to the counselor, I'll say, these are the things we see in the classroom.
Right.
But of course, for an hour a week, no, that child doesn't have those problems one-on-one with the counselor.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, these are XYZ, all the problems that we see. And you don't see it. And like, not that the counselors don't believe you, but like they don't see it.
Right.
Whereas you being in a school, you can.
Right. And it's so different. Like I'm one-on-one with a client. Like, of course, they're going to eat that up. They have my full undivided attention for 52 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
It's not in a classroom with 20 kids where there's, you know, one or two teachers and they're trying to teach and their attention is split. So it can be helpful both ways. Some cons, obviously pulling kids out of class is never like, that's not great to have to be taking them during class time. And then also it can be harder to get like some parent collaboration. Just again, same thing I'm saying with teachers when the parents bring them to me outpatient of, you know, then I'm trying to get a hold of teachers and coordinate schedules. That now I'm doing that with parents. Now I'm trying to make phone calls or, you know, hey, can you come in the middle of the day?
Right.
Or can we do like a phone family session? And that can be really important with kids and teens is to do like family
for sure
coordination. So that can just be tougher, obviously.
And the parents don't get to know you as well then either. So then when you're reaching out to them, they're like, who are you? What are you doing?
Exactly. Yeah. And that whole like school counseling versus school-based counseling. Like, no, I don't work at.
Right. I'm not the school counselor who's like going to help them pick their classes.
Right.
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
There's a big difference. And it's not a well-known difference.
Yeah.
I think overall it seems like the pros are really pro though.
I think so.
I think it's very...
Yeah, I think
positive.
It's great.
Have it. Yeah. I think something that I've seen is that like teachers will have a hard time sending the students out to the counselor. They're like, well, I don't want you to take my class time. So they can go, you're here on Tuesdays, they can go to when you're at PE.
Right.
And it's like, or you can take them when they're at music class or whatever. And like they're... That's a valuable class time too, especially often for the kiddos who are needing.
Precisely.
They need that outlet.
Now we're going to take away PE or recess
when they really need those things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know like it can be hard as a teacher to be like, well, what I'm doing is more important or whatever. But like at the end of the day, the child's mental health is for the most important. Like there's nothing more important. You can teach the child physics till you're blue in the face, but if they're not mentally well, it doesn't matter.
Right.
They're not getting anything out of your
class. They might
class.
not be paying attention anyway.
Right. Like we cannot ignore children's mental health in deference to other things. Right. Even education. And obviously a big proponent of education being very important. But
but like, I'd hope so. Thank you for saying that, because it's nice to hear that from like the education perspective, because I run into that all the time. Yes, take them during PE. And the PE teacher at the school I was at was like, why do you always get taken out of my class? And to your point, like I was there once a week. I was there every Thursday. So it's like, then they don't get PE ever, or they don't get art class ever, or music class ever. If I take them at 12:30 every Thursday, and that's when art class is. Right. Versus like, you have math every day. You have science every day. You know, you do reading every day. And so, yes, is it ideal? No, it's not. And that's when I would say school-based counselors, if you can like play with your schedule, do that. See, you know, Jenna at 8 a.m. and then Brigid at 9 a.m. and then, you know, Johnny and Susie and whatever, and then switch it. Susie comes first the next week so that they're not missing math. Right. You know, if you can do that. So like, again, like we can work together. Right. Try to flip your clients if you can. There were sometimes, like, for example, I have so many examples.
I love your examples.
I keep saying that today. I had a girl that was in like a walking boot. Like she had her ankle. Yeah. And so it made sense to take her during PE.
Right. She wasn't doing
she was
PE
just
anyway.
Sitting there. So yes, unless it's something like that, it was like, great. You're not really missing much.
Because you were going to be sitting on the sidelines anyway.
Correct. Or do you have a study hall? Yeah, that's ideal. I'll take you during your study hall.
Yes. For sure. Okay, so if we have parents out there or even educators out there who are wondering, like, how do I get licensed counselor to come into my school?
Yeah.
What do we do?
I would start at the school district. Perhaps they already have that contracted with an agency and you're not aware of it. If they have that, I hope they're marketing it. I hope parents and teachers are aware of it. Parents especially, because teachers might be. But again, if they don't know what's all going on or the parents are seeing things at home, it's nice for the parents to know that too. So definitely start there and see, you know, if it is available. If not, teachers, school counselors, parents, like talk to the admin and advocate for it. Say like, hey, I think this would be really helpful. There are a lot of pros. It's like very accessible. It can help, right? And kind of that selling point of like, it can help the school too. Like it can be collaborative.
It can help the behaviors in the classroom.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So talking to them and seeing if there's like any agencies local to wherever you are. If you are listeners out there and local, feel free to email us and reach out to me. Like I said, there are several school-based, like agencies that have school-based programs near us. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so start with the school district.
Yeah.
That sounds good. What else? Like how do we know? Like not how do we know, but like if I'm a parent and I want to know, or if I'm a teacher and I'm like, how do we know like
who to refer type of thing?
Right. Or like how do we know? Well, we'll actually probably do a whole episode on this. How do we know when counseling is important?
When does my kid need?
Yeah. I mean,
sure.
So you have like a set schedule when you're a school counselor, or like it wasn't like, okay, this week I think this child's really been struggling. They can go see Jenna, or next week, it'll be this child.
Yeah.
Like it's always the same.
Yes, it was mostly, it's all the same. That's a really good question. But yes, that's often how it is. Like I had my like referrals that the school counselor gave me, or the teachers or the parents had referred. And they were like, okay, here you go. And here's why. For example, I think this girl whose mom just died needs more than 15 minutes a week.
Right.
So I'm going to refer her to you, or whatever it is. Or like, we think that they could benefit from like more specialized mental health care than what the counselor can offer. So yeah, it was like it was all a little bit different. Some was preventative, like I mentioned with my internship.
Right.
Some was like, yes, we're seeing these behaviors in class. They're disruptive, or they're very inattentive. They're not paying attention, or we know these things are going on, right? At school or at home even. it was, I don't know, I guess interesting would be the word. I was at the school, the elementary school, we had a lockdown drill that day. I happened to be there, and they said it on the announcements. I was there in the morning. I heard it on the announcements. Now, if the kids were paying attention, I don't know.
Right.
But they said it is a drill. At noon, we're coming on. We're going to say this code word, and this is what you're going to do, right? And sure enough, at noon, they came on, they said the code word. We went into this pretend, practice lockdown. And every single client that I saw that day talked about that. Every single client, how terrified they were. And I was like, well, they said, and they were like, I know they said it was practice, but I wasn't sure. Like, I didn't know for sure, What if it happened right at the time they said they were going to practice it?
Yeah.
And so obviously things come up, like there's a lot of anxiety, I think, around like school violence and safety and guns and things like school shootings that I see come up. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's not like I was sent in when a crisis.
Right.
They of course have that. You hear it. Grief counselors will be at the school. Yeah. That does happen as well. But yeah. And there I don't know if I would say exceptions, but there's maybe like it's less common, but it does happen that if there is, like I said, there's local school-based programs that were in the schools. So they are clinical counselors. They have my degrees, my same training. And I've had them like call me as if I'm seeing the client like outpatient.
Oh, okay.
And said like, oh, hey, so-and-so, like the principal, the school counselor, whoever sent them down to me today because they were very suicidal. And so I did a suicide assessment. This was the safety plan. This was the risk level. So sometimes because they already have those professionals in the building, they will utilize that.
Yeah.
And say like, okay, we're kind of having a crisis with this student at the moment. And just to be evaluated, like, do you need to go to the hospital or can you go home or go back to class or whatever? And then obviously if they do have an outpatient provider, that like that counselor did reach out to me.
Yeah.
And or if they don't, then I could very well see that client then becoming part of the caseload.
Right.
Or being referred out or whatever. But I know like I had one client in particular that it was like a daily thing that they would come to the school-based counselor's office. And that became an issue because you can't do both. Like you can't see, because that counselor is still being paid by the agency, you can't get like double services basically, unless it's like very distinct. That's a different circumstance. And so it was like she was already seeing me, and so the counselor was having to juggle like of course if you're like in crisis, but also you can't just come here. Like I have my actual case,
right? Right.
So it's a little bit of like a fine balance. But yeah, it's typically, and there was one instance like when I was at the school that they were like, hey, can you just talk to this kid? Like something came up. I can't even remember what it was. It might have been the school shooting drill. Somebody was really upset. And again, I happened to be there. I think, so I was there once a week and another colleague was there once a week. And I think he had been there when like one of my clients had an outburst. So he kind of helped.
Gotcha.
Or like somebody had a panic attack. Like we happen to be there if we happen to be free. You might as well use like the expertise.
The people who are trained and know what they're doing. And they're not going to, like if the child comes to you and is truly having like suicidal thoughts or things like that, like as a professional in your capacity, you know how to handle it and you know what to take seriously. And whereas like a regular old school counselor might just be may not know how to handle that. Right.
And so often then what would happen like in a situation where like the school-based clinical counselor wasn't there is what happens is the parent gets called of course the parent should be told, but the parent gets called and says, hey, they just told a friend this, or this, they just came to my office and told me this. They need to be evaluated and get a suicide assessment before they can come back to school. So what that school-based counselor is doing is that assessment. And they are determining, are they at a risk level that they need hospitalization, just like I would do in my office.
Right.
And so they're already doing it. It's convenient.
It's the parent doesn't have to figure out, what do you mean? Where do I go for this? How do I do this? Yeah.
Yeah.
And anxiety is huge in kids. I mean, we'll do a whole episode on that too, but
for sure.
Especially those things like the lockdown drills and things.
Yeah.
Even fire drills, sometimes you see that anxiety. So having a professional there in the moment can be very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. Definitely. Yeah, with that lockdown drill, I actually had somebody in my office.
Oh, wow.
And so, well, like we experienced it when we were there. I saw it. So
it'll be interesting. Maybe next time we'll do anxiety in kids, because that's a big one. School and outside of school, anxiety is.
I see a lot of anxiety. A lot of kids get referred to me for anxiety. Yeah.
All right. So school-based counseling, check. Tune in next time for anxiety in kiddos.
Lucky episode 13.
Yeah.
Bye.